With James Harden and his fall off being a huge talking point last season by comparison to what he was at his peak, it's actually had me recently thinking about peak James Harden, especially because I personally have a lot of conflicting but also very strong feelings on the matter. A lot of strong feelings not just about James, but more specifically about the discourse around him. His peak is something that we've agreed is in the past now. I don't think we're ever going to see James Harden as he was in Houston again. So let's get into it. Before I continue on with this video, if you end up enjoying this video, please be sure to subscribe. Also drop a like. It only takes 1 second. It makes a massive difference in how the video performs in the YouTube algorithm. Seriously, if you end up enjoying this video, I see no reason why you wouldn't subscribe to the channel so you can get more videos like it going forward. I am now actually, genuinely, not bullshitting you, uploading pretty consistently around here. So stick around for some more NBA content and drop a like. Again, YouTubers ask for it for a reason. Makes the video do better. There is no superstar in my entire YouTube coverage of the NBA career that I have more conflicting feelings on than James Harden. And the reason I have these conflicting feelings is because for all the reasons that people don't like James Harden, not all of them, but a majority of them, at least just aesthetically speaking for his game, I agree. I have the same problems that many other people do. However, what I don't do is take that to another step and allow my distaste for some aspects of his game, primarily the foul baiting, to determine my opinion of how good the guy actually is. I find that often people not liking a player results in them underrating said player. Even if they would acknowledge that it is skillful but they don't like it, even those guys often will still underrate the player. I think James Harden is a great example of this. I think Ben Simmons, at least up until recently, was a great example of this. In all-time debates, when people like very stingently have their pick for who the GOAT is, and then you compare him to somebody else, they'll automatically shoot that option down because they don't like this guy. I know it took my dad years to finally come around to the idea that LeBron James just might have a case for the GOAT. Like, took way too long, but he was vehemently anti-LeBron, so it blinded him to the fact that, like, yeah, the dude's that good. At least for a little bit. He came around. Maturity. Growth. But for the foul baiting, for the repetitive nature of his game, because it felt like step back, drive, or foul bait, I did not enjoy necessarily watching prime James Harden all that much, though the guy certainly had his moments. But also, like, James Harden was so fucking good. And it's kind of maddening to me to hear people talk about him now like he wasn't that fucking guy. It really feels like he's discredited just simply because of aesthetics, and just with my nature, if I feel a superstar level player is underrated, I'm gonna let you know how I feel about it, so let's do that. My reasoning for thinking James Harden at his peak is both underrated and gets a bad rap is really two major narratives that exist around him. Both of which I think are pretty damn unfair, though to varying degrees. Those two criticisms are his lack of a ring and his reputation as a negative playoff performer. The first one I find far more unfair than the other, so let's tackle the less nuanced one. James Harden never had a true window to win a championship. While there are certainly years where there was an avenue, people talk about James Harden and his lack of ring as though there were multiple years where it was his for the taking and he just simply didn't. One of the absolute fucking wildest criticisms to me is when people are genuinely critical of what he and the Rockets did in 2018. I understand the insanity of the Rockets going 0 for 27 from 3. Like, that number sounds like I'm lying when I say it out loud. But it's not credited enough that it's insane enough as it is that they were even in a Game 7 to begin with. The 2018 Warriors were ostensibly the same roster as the 2017 Warriors. That's important to mention because the 2017 Warriors are the greatest fucking team of all time, and it's not close, don't at me. While they did slip in some areas in 2018, they were still very much that unstoppable force they showed the year prior. Such an unstoppable force that they still dominated the playoffs and didn't even give one game to 2018 LeBron. Of course, that was mostly due to J.R. Smith fucking up in Game 1, but regardless of that, if you can survive LeBron putting up 51, 8, and 8 on 59% true shooting, you have a truly special team on your hands. And outside of this Rockets series, they were dominant in the playoffs in both 2017 and 2018. They just turned up the dial when the playoffs came around. They lost only one game in 2017 and 2 games, excluding the Rockets series, in 2018. And they did not have a single other series in those 2 years go past 5 games. If you played the KD Warriors in either of these 2 years, your best case scenario was taking 1 game off. The Rockets, led by the superstar effort of James Harden, were the only team that made a Kevin Durant Warriors team actually fight for the win. They were casually smacking everyone in front of them, but they had to put up a hell of a fight to get past the Rockets. And yes, when the Rockets actually got to that Game 7, they severely underperformed. That's an understatement in itself. Again, 0 for 27. What the fuck? But regardless of how embarrassing that Game 7 was, that should not be the reputation of James Harden and this Rockets team. Because they ended so poorly, this team gets memed on when they should be highly regarded as potentially the best team that never won a championship. Like, that's the equivalent of you are thrown into the ring with a prime Mike Tyson. And you know what? You actually give him a run for his money. You actually make him go a couple of rounds, and then in the final round, you like twist your ankle and then he punches you and knocks you out, and it's kind of goofy and kind of embarrassing. And then the only thing people talk about from this fight is that goofy ending. And you're sitting there like, bro, I just went toe-to-toe with Mike Tyson and didn't die immediately. Where's my fucking credit? 0-27 being the legacy of that team, and through the fact that he was lone superstar, that being a huge part of Harden's legacy, is completely unfair optics. And to bring it back to people just not liking him, genuinely, if Harden was just a well-liked player, that 2018 series would be talked about a lot differently. If Harden was, say, Kawhi Leonard, the narrative would be, wow, Kawhi almost took down the prime Kevin Durant Warriors. And you know how I know people would do that if it was Kawhi instead of James Harden? It's because they already fucking did when Kawhi won 1 game and then got hurt. You understand me? The hypothetical that Kawhi Leonard maybe could have beaten the Warriors or maybe could have pushed them to 7 gets more credit and more acclaim than the fact that James Harden actually fucking pushed them to 7 games. Tell me it's not a factor that James Harden isn't well liked. You can't. Also, side note, a brilliant point for my whole thing about what ifs and the bullshit that the hypothetical of what could have happened gets more acclaim than what literally did. But anyways, I digress. Basically, my point is, James Harden and the Rockets is the only superstar / team that made the Kevin Durant Warriors in their first 2 years sweat even a little bit. And that is a Herculean task, far more impressive than, frankly, a lot of championship runs. This leads to Harden's playoff reputation as a whole, which again is a little bit more nuanced, and really my problem with the discussion around him and his playoff reputation is, again, semantics, but very important semantics. Let me put it this way for the sake of this video not getting too damn long. James Harden does have a track record of being a bad playoff performer in some closeout games and even a couple of like full series, but not his overall output. His overall output is really good. In fact, it is an all-time great output because James Harden is an all-time great player. James Harden has a lot of ugly closeout games, and yeah, not the right time to play bad basketball. But at the same time, if someone plays good for 6 games in a series and then they suck in game 7, they aren't a bad playoff performer. If you want to use the narrative playoff choker, which I think is a little aggressive, but whatever, that's fine. But his overall playoff performance is still good if he's good every game but the last one. Looking at Harden's playoff averages in Houston, in the regular season, Harden averaged 29, 8, 6, and 2 on 61% true shooting. In the playoffs, he averaged 28, 7, 6, and 2 on 58% true shooting. So to be clear, his drop off is 1 assist and 1 point and 3% true shooting, and this bad playoff player averages 28, 7, 6, and 2 on mildly above average efficiency. If that's being bad in the playoffs, if those are bad playoff numbers, then what the fuck is good? Not to mention, this is from 8 different playoff runs with 85 total games of experience. And that's not even to mention the impressiveness of having made 8 straight NBA playoffs as the lone superstar player on all of his teams, nor mentioning the fact that he averaged 29 points per game for nearly a fucking decade. And if you look at all-time great players and their playoff averages for what he did at his peak, there are no more than 20 players who have more impressive per game numbers than playoff James Harden. James didn't take his team to a championship because the path was never there. The best roster he ever had unfortunately played the same time Kevin Durant's Dubs did. The only reason it's disappointing he didn't win is because he was good enough to. Harden's talent should be remembered extremely favorably. It should be seen as impressive that he got as close as he did. But instead, because he isn't all that well liked, instead, it's just 0-27 memes and disrespecting Harden as a talent, calling him a playoff choker. It's all just terrible optics and narrative. But also, like, bro, how did you go 0-27? I will never get over that. Anyways, shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.